Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today about The Midnight Sky. Hope you all enjoyed watching the film, and please let me welcome our special guests for the conversations, starting with Felicity Jones. Where are you, Felicity?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
David Oyelowo.
Hi.
Hi. Kyle Chandler. There he is. Demian Bichir.
Hi, everybody.
Caoilinn Springall.
Hi.
Hello, Caoilinn. And lastly, the director, producer, and co-star of the film, George Clooney.
Hello. Hi, guys.
So I should say
it's past your bedtime.
So Tiffany Boone was supposed to be with us today. She plays Maya in the film, of course, but she can't be here due to a last-minute production schedule. So we send hellos and high fives from afar to her. But thank you to the rest of you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got me out of having to go to church. Thank you.
George, I want to start with you. This is a very 2020 film. I know it's set in the future, but it feels very present day. The world in this film is facing an event cascade that devastates the planet. People are isolated in the story. They're alone. They're seeking connection. When we see the world from afar, from space in the movie, it looks very much like the United States looked this summer, or Australia looked during its wildfire crisis. All that can be pretty dark and heavy, but do you see this as a cautionary tale? And is there a message of hope and resilience that you hope that you feel will, transcend that?
Well, if you stop the movie before the last 5 minutes, I think it would be a pretty depressing film. The good news is, unlike On the Beach, which is we thought of this as a modern telling of that, we do actually have, there is redemption, and in that there is a continuum with David and Felicity and little Wilbur. But from the very beginning, when we sort of pitched it, I talked about how the idea of denying science, which we tend to do right now, or these elements of hate and division that we have been seeing, not just in our country, but all around the world. When you see those things play out over the next 30 or 40 years, it's not inconceivable that we, in one way or another, destroy ourselves. We thought about blowing a hole in the atmosphere or a nuclear exchange. Didn't really think about a pandemic as much. And then the pandemic hit after we finished shooting, and it became really clear to, I think, everyone working on the film that this was it's a story about our inability to communicate, and our inability to be home, and our inability to be with the people we love, and how important that is, and how hard that is, and what you're willing to do to find your way home in one way or another. And so that was it. In general, it is a cautionary tale, of course, but we're not proud of the fact that it's timely. That's not something we're happy about.
Was it strange while you were editing it and putting the finishing touches on it? You'd finished shooting before the lockdown happened, right?
Well, the strangest part was we finished shooting. I went to the editing room with Grant, the producer, and one of my best friends for 40 years, and we turned on the TV and they said, well, this pandemic is real, and everybody, but you should only worry because it only affects the elderly. So only if you're elderly. And I looked at Grant and I was like, well, and then they said 55 or older, and then I was like, what? I was like, oh, I'm elderly now. Yeah, it was weird. It was a weird thing to have to do. Scoring the movie from here was hard. The Alexander Desplat was in Paris. The orchestra was in at Abbey Road in London, and I was here in England. So it was all complicated, but we'd all just keep on trucking, just get it done.
Well, speaking of elderly, you play far above your actual age in this film, and you look. I wouldn't say you look great. You look. How would you describe?
You know what? Let me just say this: a 2-time sexiest man alive, right, gang? 2-time, not these 1-timers.
You're really giving that title a run for its money with the Jack Elam beard and the.
You went Jack Elam, so I have to have one eye going different directions. Wow.
Tell me about the look.
Jack Elam. I would have thought some sort of distinguished David Letterman kind of thing. But yeah.
So, tell me about the look you created for Augustine and
I just, anybody who's up in the Arctic. Well, look at these guys. They've all grown their beards out in a pandemic. Not you, Felicity. You've done quite well. But yeah, if you live in the Arctic in general, they all have pretty long beards just to protect their faces. So that was just part of someone who's there. The other part was, I had to lose a bunch of weight, but that was because he's dying. The hardest part was I was in Italy when it was time to lose weight, and my wife and kids are all pounding pasta and I'm eating lentil soup, but it's all fine.
Felicity, I want to talk about your performance in the film, but also the casting of you in the film. You were cast in the role of Sully, and then when I interviewed George about the movie for Vanity Fair, he told this amazing story that you had to call him and say, actually, I've had a personal change. I'm having a baby. And I understand from him that there was a question like, would you continue? Of course, he wanted you to continue. And there was going to be a complicated special effects solution to this problem because the character wasn't originally having a baby in the script. What was the process like of figuring out how to actually work that into the story?
Yeah, well, it was quite an organic process, really. George and I spoke initially, and I said, got some news, got some great news, having a baby, and thankfully George still wanted me to do the job, which was great.
Well, wait, let me just say really quickly. So it was not on a Zoom, right? So you couldn't see our face. So she says, I'm pregnant, having a baby. What she hears is, wow, congratulations. What she sees, if she would see it, would be me going.
This is testament to George's acting, that I was aware of all of that throughout the entire process. And this very calm voice was like, Felicity, that's great. That's fantastic. Okay, let's forge ahead. So we continued. We continued in that vein, and I think we had tons of conversations about stunts, and I was like, yeah, I still want to do all the stunts, even though I'm going to be pregnant. It's going to be fine, George. And then luckily George was like, I think we might have to make just a few modifications just to ensure the safety of you and your unborn baby. So having those, we had a few of those conversations before we started shooting, and yeah, we were basically gonna CGI the bump away. So I had a body double, and then that was for the first week.
And there would be some face replacement too, right? Like not just
all sorts of technical wizardry was about to take place, and then after the first week, George was watching the footage, and then he and his producer Grant came to my trailer and said, we've been looking at everything, and actually we think there's something really interesting here, and actually we would like to have you pregnant as Sully, which I thought was a jolly good idea, because then I could just let go and start breathing out, which makes acting a lot easier. And then I think we had a chat, and George said there were a few scene alterations, and I think there was one particular scene we added with Tiffany's character and I looking at an ultrasound. And then obviously for David and I, it was just getting our heads around and having that new aspect to our new dynamic to our relationship. But it was, and then it sort of all made sense. It was all the way along, it was all just very instinctive, and it all came together and made my life much easier, so I could eat lots of chocolate cake, which was
one of those rare production problems that results in the story being better and makes it a little easier for everyone too. So that's
also, you know, another thing that happened too, I think, you know, the rest of the gang can speak to this, but, you know, it kind of pulled us all together. You know, we had, you know, her son Wilbur was a part of the cast now, and Felicity's well-being was important to all of us in a very different way, and it really sort of drew everyone in and together. I felt like on that ship, you know, it became much even more of a family.
Well, I wanted to ask David to jump in here. Uh, this story change really impacted your two characters and their relationships, and it's a very complicated relationship. It's not just a romance; it's a professional relationship, and they almost shouldn't be having, you know, a romantic partnership in addition to this. How did you feel about this added dimension to your character and the relationship with Sully?
Well, one of the things I really loved when I read the script for the first time was, despite it being this space movie, having these sci-fi elements, it had something that films like this don't tend to have, which is the astronauts. There was a complexity, there was a layering to them, rooted in character, that was outside of the external threat. A lot of the time what you have is there's an alien or an asteroid or something that they are all going up against. And it kind of erodes any possibility to really get under the skin of the characters. That was always there in this script. But for myself and Felicity, this was yet another layer, another element to play, an added complexity, because you're right, you know, these are two people who like to think of themselves as very professional. And in the original script, there was an allusion to the fact that they were having this relationship, but it wasn't overt. You know, a baby is a fairly good indication that things have happened that probably, you know, shouldn't. But the subtlety that was in the original script remained. And so it was sort of a grown-up relationship we were allowed to conduct. You know, everyone acknowledged that it was the case, but it wasn't sort of overt. We weren't sort of canoodling in the corner away from the rest of the crew, as it were. But also it afforded us, exactly as George said, it not only brought us together as a cast, but I think within the film itself, there were these sort of concentric circles that we had to deal with. And the big threat, of course, was the very reason we had been deployed to go and find a planet, which was that our planet was under threat and we had basically destroyed it and needed a replacement, as it were. Then for me as the commander, and also for Felicity as well, it was about getting us there, getting us back, making sure that this crew survived. And then we had this added layer of this unborn child, you know, new life, literally new life in our midst, was now in the process of coming forth. And so that was a really beautiful added layer on something that was already quite big and small in terms of what we had to do. So it was kind of an amazing gift.
There's also an interesting thing was that you guys, your storyline is so desperately trying to hear any sign of life,
right?
And it ends up the only sign of life that you actually hear is from inside Felicity, and that was really affirming to me, and I felt that you guys did that so beautifully.
And another thing, very quickly, Anthony, just to add to what George just said, you know, Augustine's character, as played by George, is someone I feel who is dealing with regret. He's dealing with the ramifications of choices he's made in his life around connection or the lack thereof. Our characters as well, myself and Felicity, we had left Earth quite willingly. We were okay with that disconnection from humanity. And there's sort of a beautiful irony that in fleeing Earth, we sort of found each other and new life as a process. And I just sort of thought that was just a beautiful kind of poetic eventuality that was also added by Felicity's pregnancy.
Yeah, each of the characters gets their degree of nuance. They get to be mournful, they get to be joyful, they get to be funny, they get to be intense. Demian and Kyle, I'd like to talk about your characters, Sanchez and Mitchell. George was telling me that he considered you the Statler and Waldorf of the starship, the guys from the Muppets who hang out in the balcony making comments on the action below. Was that something he told you on set, and how did that factor into your performance together?
I think he told us that right after he reminded us that he was twice the sexiest man alive.
I do that every hour.
As far as I was concerned, working with Demian was perfect. And after we went out and had a bite to eat together and got to know one another, it was very easy to settle in with the idea that we had known each other for a very long time. And going to the point, as far as David spoke about, the film being a space movie. It's like it's not a space movie with characters. It's a bunch of characters in space, and it was like a play. And then again, as far as Felicity and Mr. Wilbur, that was like, when you're working on a film and you're in a spot and you're trying to figure something out and trying to add layers to the character, and the director comes up before the scene and whispers something. It's like, of course. And that's what Wilbur was to me, because that life on the ship, that sixth character, for me, especially with my situation of the character, it brought so much. It brought so much desire for me to get home and to have what I knew so well. And I think you guys can attest to this, but when I say goodbye to Felicity, as a father and as a human, I really didn't want to let go of her. And I think George had to say, Kyle, let her go, because I loved that moment as an actor, saying goodbye to the last woman, the last child, the last memories, because I think I knew what I was getting into on that spacecraft. So that was one of my favorite moments of the whole film, personally. It moved me. It was a great experience.
It's an unbelievable moment. And it's funny because as we were watching it, after a while in editing, you start going, now, which one of these guys is the father of the baby? You held on a little too long. You know what I'm saying?
I felt that in the scene, by the way, but I let it go.
Demian, tell me about Sanchez and he's got a tragic thing that he's grappling with and thinking about, and yet he's also a very funny and lighthearted character. What was it like getting into his skin and performing this part?
Unmute yourself. You're muted.
I think Sanchez somehow knows that being the oldest in this crew, even older than Kyle, yes, believe it or not, he kind of sort of knows that he, needs to become the glue of the crew and keep everyone together. And having experienced a big loss in his life, his only way out, literally out of the planet, was, being a mission after a mission, and being a part of that, and feeling that he had a purpose in life. And it is really interesting how Wilbur, our sixth passenger, he became this kind of like a holy grail type of thing, that we all were, we needed to take care of it, almost like Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, that, is this new creature, this new beautiful being that's gonna, create this hope toward the end of the film, that's exactly who we are as humanity. And I think that was a beautiful thing to play with when we found out that, we had that new asset. And I just love that George and Grant took it as a virtue type of, detail that we used. And of course, being a part of this, a film such as this, is just a joy in many different ways. First of all, this is I worked with, some of these artists before. David and I did Chaos Walking together. And so we already knew each other. And it was beautiful to, see him again. And also Kyle and I had done another film together before this. And Alexandre Plat did the music for A Better Life, the film that helped me to meet George Clooney when we were nominated for Best Actor for the Oscars. And so it was like a reunion of many, different people, different artists. And me as an actor, it's just fantastic that you don't find, many Mexicans that are astrodynamicists in any Hollywood film, in any Hollywood script. So that alone, it was fantastic, because you as an actor and my fellow peers that are listening to us, they know how hard it is to just step away from stereotypes and cliches and this and that, and that's what you face most of the time. Is one of the challenges that any actor faces in these times, when you go to an audition, that they already, they want to see that face, and if you have made a film that actually, got you some recognition, then they want to see the same face over and over and over again, and they send you scripts to play, exactly the same character. So every time I have the chance to explore different characters and different genres, and that to me is just a blessing, and I couldn't have been better than with this beautiful group of artists.
Oh, that's really
Also,
nice.
these characters, Kyle and Demian's characters in the script and in the book are much, much, much younger, but it sort of loses its punch at the end, unless you got a few miles on you, when these two guys want to go home. You needed there to be something, it's like all guys cry at like Brian's song, because it's like the guy going, I love Brian Piccolo. And there is something about these guys, when the two of them say, I like, when Demian says, I'd like to take a ride home with my buddy, if that's okay. And Kyle says, okay. They're not going, we don't know if we're going to make it. We don't know. There's none of that. It's just really simple, a conversation between two people who've known each other for a long time. And it helped, that they were, as ancient as they are.
Well, speaking of ancient, Caoilinn. Great segue to you. This is your first film, right?
Yeah.
What are your favorite memories from making it?
Well, I have, one of them is going to Iceland with George and filming it. And the other one is all the scenes where me and George connect, because I feel like that's a special bond with me and George. I just feel like that's a really good connection. And at the beginning, I felt a little bit nervous, like, oh, this is my first film, I don't know what to do. But then I liked it, and then I just wanted to do more acting.
Well, that kind of fits in with the character, because she plays afraid, right? She's afraid of where she is, and she's hiding. She's a little afraid of George, which I guess I can understand with that scary beard. Did your own personal feelings work into the performance?
Yes.
You have to understand, like Caoilinn came in, we read a couple hundred kids to do this. And Caoilinn came in, and and all the kids were terrific, and they did a really good job. But, actors in general, I played a pediatrician on ER. I worked with kids a lot. Yeah. And a lot of times they come in sort of pre-coached, and they have a preconceived idea, and they know they're going to hit a spot and say this line and turn and say that line. And Caoilinn just listens. And, I think everybody on this panel and everybody who's listening in would agree that the best form of acting is listening. That's the best part. That's when you're in the scene. And Caoilinn just listens. And so she, and I've told this a lot to other people, but it's completely true. She put us all to shame, because 50% of the stuff we did with her, I think Caoilinn, a lot of stuff was in one take, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm ashamed of myself. But Caoilinn is, I think, is going to have a really fun time, if she wants to, playing other parts, because I think she was just a natural.
Were you shooting outside at all in some of those scenes where you're traveling, or was all of that created in a soundstage?
Caoilinn, were we shooting outside?
Yeah. We went to Iceland, and then some of it was in the UK, but mostly in UK. But we did some shooting in the Iceland, and all of the wind was real in Iceland. None of it was fake. And I remember one take, there was a middle of like a snowstorm, basically. Just walked out, came back. I just came back in, and I just came back with rosy red cheeks.
We had strings tied to each other so we couldn't get lost in it. You know, it was funny. But Caoilinn's tough. She's a tough little girl because, it was 40 degrees below zero and we'd have gusts up to 70 miles an hour. And we were out there and, I'm holding her hand and, and she's just standing there taking it. The wind's knocking her down and, she was up for it. It was good fun.
Well, we have some audience questions. And one of those questions is for Caoilinn, and it's from Courtney, and she asks, was it difficult to play your part where you had to act without words, when you had only your eyes or silent expressions to reveal what your character was feeling?
Well, it was hard because you only have to use your emotions, and you don't have to do everything, because sometimes you have to use your eyes, your body, and you just can't talk. And I felt that very stressful. But in the end, I got there. But at first, I just stand there and just didn't know what to do.
When you get older, Caoilinn, just so you know, when you get older and you can't remember lines anymore, you really appreciate those scenes where you don't have to say anything.
So another question from Paul says, how did you achieve the zero gravity scenes in the film? I assume he's talking about some of the, especially the blood sequence where Maya.
Well, I think Felicity and David and Demian can talk about it because they were hanging on. Well, she wasn't on a wire. We worked it out, so she wasn't.
I
but
was comfy. I was on a little stool and I was watching everyone else do tremendously hard work while I just, kicked back and looked up at them. But these guys had the really, really hard work, all the training and core stuff. It's really tough being on those wires. So I was quite thankful just to be I think I just had a sort of short leash, a very short leash to the base of my stool, and then kind of wafted my hands slowly. But I think David, it seemed like it was much more strenuous a process. So there is an advantage of being pregnant while shooting.
We were huge beneficiaries of the fact that George has done a few films where he's played an astronaut as well, as we all know. And so but very early on in the process, myself, Tiffany Boone, who plays Maya, and Demian as well, we had to do a fair bit of training. I think it was about 2-3 months of training to really strengthen our core, because basically the thing to do is to make the effortlessness. The effortlessness is built on a lot of effort, is the truth of the matter. You have to be incredibly strong in order to look like you are floating. And George really helped us because, just tips like your mouth and your mind had to work faster than your body was allowed to. In a sense as well. And that was something that there were just so many things going on in that spacewalk, both technically, visual effects wise, physically, emotionally. It was a very tough scene. And, it was one of the moments where George really earned his money as a director, because he had to remind us consistently about what our bodies are doing, what's happening emotionally, what's going to be happening with VFX that we can't yet see. So it was a very complicated thing to be a part of, but as a result, watching the film and watching that sequence and scene particularly was an out-of-body experience, because so many things had to come together to make it work. And like I say, George, having done these other films, I think he really knew the pitfalls. He really knew what makes them work and what doesn't. And the other beautiful thing about having an actor who has experienced it as our director was that he laid the foundation for those things. Normally, you're begging to have the time to train, the time to understand what the sequence is, the time to rehearse with the stunt crew. But that all was prioritized because George really knew exactly what needed to go into making that sequence as effective as it eventually was.
And
Well, I saw your first attempt, and I knew he was going to take 6 weeks of training. Let's face it.
And also, we were very lucky to have a fantastic stunt coordinator and his team, who trained us really, really nicely. It was hardcore training. Even Kyle, that didn't have to go into zero gravity, he went into that training. He was begging for forgiveness. Yeah, but you know, it was a very, very heavy training. It's often said that actors need to be athletes in many different ways, you know, and this is what this is all about. You know, you regularly have to be training yourself and then maintaining your instrument in good shape for this type of action films.
Also, I do want to bring up one thing because she's not here. Tiffany Boone brings so much to this movie. You know, she was, you know, this was strangely one of the toughest parts to cast. I don't know why, but it just was to find the exact right person. And, you know, when we do that blood scene, which is a pretty, you know, tough scene to do, you know, all the actors are in there and they're having to act without seeing anything because that's all done with digital effects, you know, and to have all of you guys and particularly Tiffany in that sequence, because, you know, when she says that's too much blood and all of everything she did there, there wasn't a question in your mind that she's seeing that blood, and she's a real, you know, she's a powerhouse of a young actress, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds for her. She was a great, a tremendous asset on this film.
Mm. We have a follow-up to that, a question from the audience. Her name is Queen. She wanted to know about the construction of that blood sequence. And George, you know, typically when somebody is bleeding out in a movie, it's messy. There's blood smeared around them, especially if they're in white outfits like those astronaut suits and a white environment like that, that chamber. But you've kept the blood contained and it's floating in almost these beautiful orbs. It seems like you were going for the anti-horror there. And when she says that's too much blood, it's because she's seeing the volume, not seeing it smeared around like in a battle.
It doesn't really smear into things, you know, in space. Originally in the script, it was she runs out of oxygen, and we kind of did that in Gravity. And I was watching some stuff with like Mark Kelly and those guys up in the space station, and they would drink water by throwing it up in the air and then sucking it out of the air. And so I went to the effects guys and they said, can we do that? Can we have her bleed out? And then I said, I want the blood to look, I want it to be a ballet. I want the blood to move and have this elegance to it. But it was really interesting going to Alexander Desplat, the composer, who can't see the effects yet, and say, I need you to write us a ballet. And he's like, a ballet for the blood? And I was like, yes. But everybody, you know, and so, yes, in general, it wasn't, you know, that it takes a while to get that right. But, you know, it only works, you know, effects are amazing. But none of this works unless these guys all make it work, you know, unless these guys all commit to it. You know, Caoilinn, some of the stuff that I did with Caoilinn, you know, I'm obviously not falling in the water in the Arctic. We built that set. That's a tank somewhere. And, you know, so we got all these effects and things going on, and Caoilinn still, you know, who hasn't ever acted in the film, you know, goes running away, pulling the gun away, and then turns back and looks, and you look at her face and you think she's out in the Arctic and she's seeing somebody fall through the ice. I mean, you know, every actor here had to fully commit to stuff that they couldn't see, and we've all done it. You know, we've all worked on green screens before and things, but this one was different because there was an emotion to it that played very differently, and everybody had to commit to that. Kyle's, you know, the scene when Kyle says, you know, goes up with David and says he wants to go home, you know, in the middle of it, we had this giant screen, which at the time was, you know, it was just you know, we didn't know what we were going to put up there yet. You know, we knew it was going to be some bad Earth thing. And still he has to be focused on telling the story about how he wants to keep a promise he made to his wife, which was a line that Kyle wrote, by the way. All the actors added those things, those elements. Everybody said, it was just it was a real, everybody came in and brought their own stuff to it and made every scene better because of it.
Well, that leads us to another question from Dakota, who asks, what did you bring to it? Any of you who'd like to answer, was there some personal element to the character that you contributed that maybe wasn't in the script, that was something that you brought to the story?
I'd like to say something real quick, because George, what you just said, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, and all actors that have worked with you know this, but it's a great joy when you come to a set and you bring ideas, and you're asked to bring ideas. I mean, it doesn't always happen like that, and to be quite honest, you particularly are you make it so much fun to begin with, and you start from a complete different level being an actor as well, and all the different things. So thanks for keeping our imaginations going while we're at home cooking pasta, trying to figure out what we're doing the next day, because you open that conversation up, and that brings so much joy to the job.
Well, so many things changed. David had a real a different take on who the character was, completely changing his nationality and his name, David, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, what Demian said about seeing a Mexican in space having the job he has. I haven't seen the commander of a space station in a movie be a Black person, and George had already laid this groundwork, this foundation, whereby he was really accommodating, open, and inviting of the things that we could contribute. And I wanted to take it a step further. I said, well, George, I haven't seen a film with an African astronaut in a movie, and my character's name was originally Commander Harper, and I proposed him being of African descent, because we all know the power of cinema in terms of representation and what it means when a Mexican is watching Demian in this role, when a woman who is pregnant and is being told by the world that she is somehow diminished in her power and who she is because she's pregnant, then seeing Felicity doing a spacewalk pregnant. And I know the effect it has on the millions of Africans around the world to see the commander of a space station who is of African descent. And so I went to George and I proposed him having an African name. And so I came up with this name, Adewale, which is a Yoruba name from the tribe I'm from in Nigeria. And he was completely open and receptive to it. And I cannot begin to tell you what that is going to mean. There's so many Africans all over the world, kids who, it's funny, I spoke to an astronaut just the other week. We were doing an interview together. His name was Alvin. And he was talking about the fact that both he and so many of those who go on to become astronauts is because they saw astronauts in movies, or they saw astronauts in documentaries or footage of astronauts. They didn't even know what the job was. He literally just saw the moon landing and thought, I want to do that. Whatever they're doing, I want to do that. And that is the effect. That is the power, the cultural power also of what we do. And so to have that representation, I will take that to my grave, George allowing me to make that change. And I know many people will be incredibly inspired and happy to see that in the film as well.
Anyone else have any thoughts about something you personally contributed to the evolution of your character?
I actually suggested to George that instead of being, playing whatever PlayStation type of games, that Sanchez should be connected to chess, the game of chess. And being one of the most ancient games, and me being so old, then, it played together very nicely. And we didn't explore that any deeper, but it was there. It was a present element that he wanted to go for.
Everybody brought something. Felicity actually brought two things to the table. She brought their incredible talent and Wilbur. I remember specifically, I can't tell you how many different moments there were I remember the scene after Maya dies, where everybody has to get back to work, and we did a scene with Felicity, where she's it's just a private moment alone, and we're in the room. It's just she and I, and it's two actors at that point, and we sort of talked through what it might be, and there was some, like, we were trying to figure out what that might be, what that moment might be, and it was a really nice moment for to just sit in that room for for the moments that we had there, and then to be able to watch. We talked for a while, and we sat there for a while, and then Felicity just said, she just kind of, you could tell when she was ready to shoot the scene, and you could say, roll the camera.
I know, because we were starting with originally we were going to start with all the wides, weren't we? And then you could see that the emotion was coming.
Yeah.
And okay, let's go straight to the close up, which was so nice, because usually you're in those situations and you're kind of on the edge of the emotion, and then you realize, oh my god, the directors, they've got their whole shot list, and there's about 20 other shots before they're going to get here, and it's so frustrating. And it makes it so much easier when George is in tune with where you are and how you are. But that was the whole atmosphere on set, is George's absolute focus on you being able to deliver what you need to deliver in that moment. And that is what makes it so unique, is there's no kind of messiness or confusion or it's just completely disciplined, but with tenderness and trust. And that is a pretty magic combination.
And it was beautiful. Oh, sorry, George.
No, I was just going to say I had to do the scene when she says to me, "I'm Iris," when I'm on the microphone with her, and she says, "And I'm Iris," and I had to do that with our first AD doing Felicity's lines, and it's a very emotional scene, And I remember I'm just hearing like, "Right, now I'm Iris," and I'm like, "No."
That's acting. Caoilinn, I want to ask you the same question. Nobody knows what it's like to be a kid like a kid. Were there any things in the script or the story or in your scenes that you came up with on your own or suggested to George?
Not really, because I don't have that much lines. So I didn't really come up to George and say, but I didn't have that much lines, so I didn't say anything.
Not so much in terms of lines, but the way you flick a pea or something. That's a kid knows how to a lot about how to cause mischief and mystery, right?
He had it down. She had it down from the start.
Yeah, he. Honestly, directing Caoilinn was pretty easy, because she and her mom had this wonderful relationship, and her mom kind of talked her through what the scenes would be about, because sometimes they're pretty difficult scenes. But we would go out. I'd look over and I'd see this beautiful, shot of the sun blasting into these dunes, and the wind sort of pouring over. And I said, let's go dig ourselves a hole to get in and to bury ourselves, and just because we were, we only had about 4 hours to shoot of light, so we had to move quickly. And I went over there and we just started digging. I said, Caoilinn, help me dig, and she just started pounding snow out with her hands and yanking it out. And eventually I'd say, we're far enough back you can't see it. And I said, okay, you can stop digging, because she was like, she went wild on it. But from the very beginning all the way through, we shot all of our stuff first, Caoilinn and I, and everything she did, she knew what the scene was about. If you watch the scene where we're sitting in the chairs together and we're looking up at Polaris, there's an awful lot of very good actors that would have a plan as to what that scene should have been. And Caoilinn, I say, "This Polaris, do you see it?" And she looks up at it, and then she looks over at me and she shakes her head like that. And that's listening. Again, it's acting 101, but it's something that gets lost and forgotten a lot by all of us old pros sometimes.
But it's also worth saying that, you know, and it's really annoying, especially as George has been sexiest man alive twice, to give him more compliments. But it is wonderful to be directed by someone with whom you feel completely safe to be in the moment and who creates that environment. I mean, you know, one of the beautiful things to see when we were shooting the film is going through that first week where we were trying to pretend Felicity wasn't pregnant, and then the moment where the decision was made to allow her to be that, and the freedom that suddenly Felicity was allowed to move in, and you could feel it in her performance. You could feel that became infectious for the rest of us, and it was something that just opened us all up. And you need a certain level of emotional intelligence, not only to spot that, but to allow it and then embrace it. And there were so many other parts of the film that did that. I remember talking to George and Grant about, you know, needing a moment for my character where I just had to take stock about the responsibility of what was ahead. And George came in the next day with this speech that he had written for me, where I had the opportunity to have a moment alone and express these things. And they're a really lovely moment in the film where it's now used as part narration, but you also get to see me as the commander really struggling with how to handle what's ahead and my own trepidation around that. That wasn't in the original screenplay, but that was something that unlocked so much for me and informed so many of the other scenes I got to play in the movie. And so, you know, it's just a very rare thing to have that elasticity and malleability as you are in the middle of making the film, especially a film of this size that, you know, needs a certain level of constraint in order to hit the days. But George is also incredible with the pace of the shooting, which allows for time for those kind of things to breathe as well.
You know, directing in a weird way is a lot like improv too. You know, like it is the same as being an actor in some ways, which is, you know, in improv, you can't say no, right? If you say no, you stop the improv. If you go, the wall is blue and you go, no, it's not, then everybody just stands there and, okay, well, improv is dead. But if you go, yes, and it's blue and there's a giraffe standing next to it, you know, and then the improv keeps going. Well, it's the same thing here. You know, once you go, okay, Felicity's pregnant and then it's like, okay, and then we'll write the scene for Kyle and David. And, you know, the Hyacinth scene is, I had an uncle named Poopy Campo, you know, and he was a band leader. And he was on the Today Show. He was the first band leader on the Today Show back in the 50s, sort of a famous band leader. His name is Poopy Campo. And I was like, you know, and then my parents told me like a couple of years ago, that wasn't really his name, is, you know, and I said, well, who would take that name, you know? And they said, well, his real name is Hyacinth. And I was like, Hyacinth? And I was like, okay, well, Poopy's all right. So, you know, then we got the Hyacinth scene in, because it's like, oh, okay, well, now this gives a chance for these two guys to have some, you know, levity and some peaceful moments. So it was always adding things by just saying, okay, well, if we're going to do that, then we're going to do the ultrasound scene, and you're going to have, you know, Felicity and Tiffany do this beautiful piece together. And, you know, I would say to Demian, just walk down, I want to pull with you and just walk down the hallway. And he would go, what are we thinking? And I said, just walk. And, you know, I go back to, you know, Michael Clayton, and the last shot in Michael Clayton is a 5-minute shot of just me. And people like, oh God, you know, that told us so much about what was going on in the story. The truth is, we'd stolen the location, and all these cars were driving around going, hey, George Clooney. And all I'm trying to do is not laugh. But no, it doesn't matter what we feel as actors necessarily. It matters what the audience feels. Mm. And so everybody here literally, they took a leap of faith in working with me. But also there was this great, just, you know, everybody would come in and say, I got this idea. You know, when Kyle said to me, you know, I think that this is about a promise he kept to his wife. Well, that wasn't in the script, and it's a beautiful script. Mark's a wonderful writer. But Kyle said, I think this is about a promise I kept to my wife. And it changed everything. It changed that moment considerably and made it so, you know, in your chest, you know, where he goes, I'm gonna take the other one and go home, you know. So it was just in a weird way, a compliment to Netflix that they would let us take a film of this scale and improvise in it, you know.
Well, I want to thank you all for being so generous with your time and answering all these questions from me and from the audience. I just want to say farewell to Felicity Jones, David Oyelowo, Kyle Chandler, Demian Bichir, Caoilinn Springall, and George Clooney, the director and producer and two-time sexiest man alive.
Soon to be AARP's sexiest man still alive.
George, I think you would have won it this year, but it was rigged.
You know what I'm doing? I know there was some votes that weren't counted, I think.
Don't accept these results. Keep fighting. Get it.
No, you know, I'm going to work with Michael Jordan. I think that there's a possibility that he might be able to be a repeat, which has never happened. Like a 2 in a row. And he was running a good campaign last year. So I'm going to work with him again.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you to the audience for joining us today to talk about the midnight sky. Be well, everyone.
Bye, guys. Stay safe. It's good to see you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye.